Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, presented by Cannonball Books, the kids' fiction imprint of Cannon Press.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
Okay, Brian.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. We are now. Welcome to SASF, everybody. This is the first time I've got some feedback here, friends. Come on now, be professional.
We're almost good. Woo. Just that one, probably, huh?
Maybe. We're getting there.
Well, here we are. For those who are just listening to our podcast, next week when this airs, you get to be in front of a bunch of NSA student visitors.
Our first live studio audience.
I think so, yeah.
So they're going to screw up, for sure. But next week we have a chance with another live studio audience. So we're doing part one and part two, and we're going to see which of you do a better job.
Right.
Because ultimately this podcast is about
results.
I was going to say the quality of the American homeschooled teen.
Oh. Yeah, yes.
How many of you are not homeschooled? Okay.
So
how
many are though?
That's a good sample size for the quality. It's about half and half for you
half.
blind podcast listeners. The quality of the homeschooled and private schooled teen. So we're going to see how terrible they are.
Okay, good.
So on this podcast, for those of you who do not listen, we talk a lot about story, film, novels, etc., Bible stories. Today, Brian wanted to talk about Jeroboam, and I'm curious what you all would like us to talk about.
So I think we're going to
kind of follow the mob. So books, movies, and let's start with people who actually listen to the podcast, so you know what we've covered.
Because I think part of the advice
over here, front left.
I had a question about your episode admitting you have bad taste.
Yes.
Question about the bad taste episode?
So I have a lot of friends who say that I need to read these books like Twilight and The Hunger Games. And I say I don't want to waste my time, but they say that I shouldn't judge them because I haven't read them. So how should I respond to that when I know that I don't want to waste my time?
Yeah. Okay. So to repeat the question into a better mic, the short version is the question about the episode about admitting you have bad taste, which most of you all probably do have terrible taste. The odds are in our favor.
We can say all.
Yeah. I actually there was a moment where I thought about stating it more honestly, and then I thought, let's be polite. Only most of you have bad taste. But the question is, what do you say when people want you to read something before you judge it? They don't want you to prejudge at all. So they're saying you may not have an opinion about a book because you haven't read it yet. The problem is that in all cases of reading or watching, you are an investor. You're investing time, and there's a return on your time or not. And you are required to judge. Your friends determined that reading Twilight would give them a return on their investment. And the question is, what kind of return are they chasing? And usually that's the issue. The issue is a question of what do they want? They want to be scintillated. They want to have this weird wish fulfillment, glittery, immortal boyfriend fantasy, whatever it might be. And it paid off. Because of their bad taste, the amount of time they invested in the series paid off. The investment was positive. And so they're telling you, you have to read it too. And you're saying, I don't think I'm going to get a reward from this. I don't think there's a return. This is a bad investment of my time. And so the question there is just having the conversation over positive outcomes, positive return on time. What are you looking for in a book at all? Is this me? Is it just me? So what are you looking for in a book at all? I'm going to turn my phone off while I think about this. This happens all the time in the podcast. In case you're wondering, we have to turn.
You're getting the full experience.
The real experience, the honest experience. He even told me to wear a hoodie because I almost always do. So does that explain to you kind of like what are you looking for? And you're going to find out when you have that conversation. Throw out all the emotional baggage of you like this book, I don't like this book. What is a worthwhile book to read? What is the return? And so with Hunger Games, if you're interested in story generally, and you're interested in culture and what moves people, I think Hunger Games is worth reading, book one. There's a
Yeah,
lot.
I mean
There's a lot there to learn about, but only if you come to it with a really aggressive and intelligent, fully engaged mind.
Right. So if you just get into the fan club of Katniss, right,
Yeah.
and you head into the Hunger Games thinking, man, she's so cool, everything she does is cool, you're in for a bit of a wild ride as she takes you places that a heroine wouldn't, right? But if you're entering in and enjoying some of the world that she created and understanding why that could become a successful movie, like those emotional elements,
Yeah.
that's much more fun.
But reading it and asking constantly, like, what is this saying? Is it true? That can be a valuable exercise, and you shouldn't be scared of reading a book like that. With Twilight, even I would just position yourself in a better place where you're not saying that's a terrible book. Like, okay, fair enough, you didn't read it. You don't really know the ways in which it's terrible. It's better to say, I don't think it's worth my time. Like that's
And this
it's not
isn't-
worth my time. I do not expect a positive return on my investment from this read.
And this is embarrassing to say in front of you all, but I did read Twilight in high school because everyone said
So
it
that
was
I
so
didn't have
good. I walked so that Nate could run, and it wasn't worth it. So it was a terrible waste of time, and it wasn't worth it. I can't remember. I think the girls in my class were super into it, and I was like, oh, I'll try it. High school guys. And
Brian's like, at some point, I need to understand women.
and I thought
And
that was not worth my time.
May as well learn to understand women now by reading Twilight.
Right. And I think my wife has never even read it. So, I didn't even need to.
Perfect.
Real waste.
Okay. So that was a question about episode number 49. You have bad taste. I'm making up that number. I have no idea what it was. The You Have Bad Taste episode. Okay. Over here by the old tapestry against the wall.
Talk about the Song of Roland.
Heavy sigh. Can we talk about the Song of Roland?
Like, what do you want us to talk
I think
about?
we could talk about the Song of Roland. I have no desire to talk about the Song of Roland. So let's move one in. Well, look at me. I could start talking about the Song of Roland. Overly romantic. I don't like it.
The best part was when the guy blew his brains out with the horn.
Yeah.
But also, I thought,
Which I've personally done. So one in from Song of Roland.
So I have a question about Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah.
So
Jojo Rabbit it is.
Taika Waititi uses humor for a movie that's set in a time period and a situation that's very serious, and yet he pulls it off very well. Do you think that if it can be executed well and done correctly, that humor should be used in those movies, like all the time, those kinds of movies?
Should humor always be used in movies set in miserable time periods?
Well, not necessarily miserable. It's just if it can help convey the message, like that the director or the writer is intending to convey, without disrespecting the seriousness that it was.
Okay, I'm gonna jump off on this a little bit, and then you can tell us if we covered it or not. The question is basically whether or not, because Taika Waititi so successfully uses humor in Jojo Rabbit, and he does, is that an example of how humor should pervade lots of storytelling and lots of other genres? I would say that the way God tells stories in his reality all the time is never as serious as our stories. So take a show like Terminal List. Did you try to watch Terminal List?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I watched.
You
season
watched all
one.
of it?
I watched season 1, but
Yeah.
it turned into a bit of an artistic exercise at the end. We were just thinking, how can they save this? And
Yeah,
they could
so
not.
the Chris Pratt Amazon show, and it's insufferably serious and just bad. But you look at the way God tells stories, and I'll give a couple of examples, autobiographical examples. The first is the most recent. This last week, I was up in Coeur d'Alene Lake. The stars were amazing. Everything was glorious. And 1 a.m. or so, I walked down onto the dock, and just the excuse was to put stuff away and make sure it was all secure if wind came up in the morning. But I was actually just going down to check the stars and get bitten by mosquitoes. So as I got out on the dock, I'm looking at the Milky Way, and it is absurd, right? This is not a realistic world that we live in. It's completely far-fetched. So it is outside of our understanding, and it is amazing and magnificent. And I'm standing here kind of feeling that vibe, and I turn around, and There's a very large, fat, naked man. It's just like I go from Milky Way to like, whoa, like, what is he doing? Holding a beer, fist on a hip.
He's having the same moment you were.
He was just feeling the poetry of the universe. Believing that no one could possibly be further out onto the water than he was, and that he was completely invisible. He was not. And that's how God tells his stories. He does it to you, and he does it to everybody else. I guarantee you, if you give in to temptation and decide to really go digging in your nose, you're going to go pick your nose for some absurd reason, which still infuriates your hardworking homeschooling mother. You've decided to do this. I guarantee you somebody's watching. For someone, it's a funny thing. Like they got that beat. So I got out there, I turn around, here's this fat naked guy with a beer and his fist on his hip standing below the Milky Way, also appreciating.
I am what I am.
Yeah, and he was feeling all Walt Whitman-y.
Yeah.
And I waited for the barbaric yop, but it didn't come.
Yeah.
But that's how God tells stories, always.
I mean,
Always.
imagine too that huge news article about just, that tragedy of the submarine viewing the Titanic and then the people disappearing, and just the moment of them all being in a submarine saying, imagine what it would have been like to sink on the Titanic. Right?
Yeah.
That your question about, is humor okay to use? Like that question right there, you immediately feel the edge of like, is that okay to
too
say?
soon?
Is that too soon? I mean, it's
and you have the direct descendant of people who died on the Titanic down there
on the submarine.
Weirdly, with no windows, watching it on a screen, clearly having a philosophical problem with what seeing something is. So could have just sent a camera, is looking at a TV monitor.
So they weren't even
2 miles
looking
underwater.
Anyways, turns out they never even made it that far. But as far as that moment of when can you use humor? I think humor always plays with that edge, right?
And God is frequently pushes lines.
Yeah, really rude.
He pushes lines.
He's super rude.
That your mother is not comfortable with, and if she's a good mom, she's not comfortable with it. That's not to slight your mother. God is constantly telling stories that have those humorous beats, and you see really talented directors understand that. Really talented novelists understand that. I recently went back through The Road, which I'd never finished because I found it insufferable to read, but I went through the audiobook.
Interesting.
So I went through the audiobook all the way, and the thing Cormac McCarthy does really well is he finds these humorous beats and just horrendous context. It's really, really bad. There's a scene right at the beginning of Gladiator when Maximus, Russell Crowe's character, is standing here ready to slaughter the barbarians, and he just sees a bird. He notices a bird and gets distracted. And there's this very brief beat right before Cataclysm when he's looking at a bird, which is, of course, not actually there. Ridley Scott's directing him to imagine a bird and see the bird. He's looking for that reaction. They insert the bird later. Bird goes and he follows the bird, and then absolute slaughter. Like that's how the stories are told. So Jonah's whale had a whole day before that and had days after that. And you could do the story from that, animal's perspective and just the strange mission that fish was on.
And sometimes those guys live for a long, long time. That's a very big perspective.
Yeah, there's and that fish had a genealogy that went back to the day of creation. So like there's fathers and mothers to go all the way back for this long lineage just to get to this one fish.
I mean, that fish probably ate plenty of people. Its family had eaten plenty of people. Noah's Ark, all the dead bodies in the water there. You go back nice and far.
Plenty of protein.
There's, it wasn't the first time its lineage had eaten people.
The other story I have is similar, and I've told it before, but it's the first time I ever read G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, which I read in Virginia Beach, sitting with my back against a tree in the most perfect weather of all time, and had that Milky Way experience where reading Chesterton's paradoxes and his inversions, the way he would flip things upside down and see things truly, but in unexpected ways. And I was feeling deeply edified, let's say, yea, verily inspired. And at that moment, a squirrel pooped in my book. And I'd never seen or heard of anything like this happening before. But I was sitting there, and I have this book somewhere with this horrible stain in the middle of it, and this squirrel started chattering, and so there's gorgeous moment, high spirituality, and then a tree rodent is annoyed at me and decides to defecate on Chesterton, and Chesterton would have loved that, like that moment, he would have absolutely loved, and I had to clear out because the squirrel was not done, so. And it took like a 10-second delay before I was processing it all as a very Chestertonian moment. But it really was. It was the completion of the scene. And so reality has a lot of humor in it. And you'll see that in films like Jojo Rabbit, which is farcical and inflated. The humor is inflated, but it draws attention to the humorous things that are actual, that are real. Hitler's mustache was funny. Hitler was a cartoon character. And yet,
Nietzsche, same thing.
Yeah. And yet a horrifying villain. But even the most horrifying villain we can think of, God draws a mustache on. You see Life is Beautiful is another film we mentioned in that podcast that plays up the humorous aspect of man, even in the darkest moments, and does it really well.
And you should enjoy the fact that Nietzsche has entire rants written about how terrible women are. And yet he spent the last 10 years of his life basically a vegetable taken care of by women, his sister and his mom, right? That's another moment of like humor, but not for us.
Well, God plays hardball. God plays really rough, which is joyfully, but rough. Nietzsche shakes his fist at God. If you read The Antichrist, there are blasphemies in there that should make you laugh out loud. Like they're going to take you by surprise. But you need to know the whole story of what happened to this little blasphemer who was trying to shake his fist at heaven and how it ended. It did not end well. And so when God strikes the most powerful man on the planet and makes him think he's a donkey and he's out there grazing, he's playing rough. He's playing extremely rough. And that's through all the Old Testament stories and in the natural world around us, we see that all the time.
I think that's a good test. So if you have a friend who's obsessed with talking about beauty but can never laugh at that sort of thing, that's a good test to see that friend is running the danger of being the sort of Protestant who converts to Eastern Orthodoxy or those types of things. You know, that obsession of like it needs to like be ancient and have smells and bells.
It needs to make me feel something. Whenever anybody's basing something off of their own sensation and feeling as opposed to any kind of objective aesthetic standard outside of them, then there's trouble brewing for sure. Any other questions from you all? Yes, sir, Mr. Story.
So I've read all your novels, and I'm just wondering. So you rate novels and books on food levels. How would you rate your books?
I rate novels and books on food levels. And what kind of food are my books?
From like a McDonald's burger to like a steak. Wide range.
Isn't that kind of too small of a scale to be talking about the scale of books? We're talking like snacks. I think we go from snacks to entrees might be a better way of looking at this.
I mean, a Hello Ninja is snacks. Like you're trying to serve up some crackers to some kids.
My kids get really excited about crackers. So
yeah. I in graduate school 20 years ago or so, I had a professor decide to try to mentor me, and he didn't understand that I was incapable of taking things seriously at the time. So I still am, I guess. But so he tried to take me aside and ask me if I wanted to be his mentee, and he thought I could potentially write something someday, and did I want to study under him to do this? This was not at New St. Andrews, by the way. And I said...
Did he use the word mentee?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Also, if I wanted to disciple under him.
Oh, mentee and disciple.
Yeah. And he was, I loved apologetics. He was into apologetics. He was engaged in a lot of things. Nice guy, self-serious, like really self-serious. And he took this moment very seriously. And I was taken aback and I didn't answer. I think he thought I was awestruck. And he asked me where I saw myself in 10 years, because he was pretty sure he could make it happen. And I said, I see myself standing by a barbecue. And he kind of took that on board and said, okay, 20 years.
Okay, 20.
And I said, still the barbecue. Probably a little bigger, like a bigger barbecue. And he got really frustrated at me. He was extremely annoyed. And I love to barbecue. I love to grill. And so that's kind of where I slot my books. Like, I like to serve up good burgers, like a good burger. I want to make a burger that's better than another burger. I'm also very competitive. So when I step into something, I want to try to make it as good as I possibly can. And I get a great deal of pleasure out of serving meat off the grill that people are surprised by, haven't had things like it before, or it's just a classic, but rendered in a way that is a little bit awakening. So I'm not trying to reinvent. If you take a 4-inch ribeye, I'm talking about a steak that is really thick, and you indirect heat that thing or low heat it for a long time and then reverse sear it and slice it, you can really shock people. They've had this cut of meat 1,000 times in their lives, and then they have something completely new and old at the same time. And chasing that new and old is the thing I try to do. So including with film pitches, I've presented a lot of things to people where I'm trying to present things that would feel like this should have already been written. This should have already been made. How has this not been made yet? Like, it feels classic. Like, so I'm not trying to invent new cuisine or do Asian fusion or anything like that. I'm trying to take really classic things, classic themes, classic characters, and I'm trying to serve them up to the highest level of execution that I'm capable of doing. And so that's the measure for me. So how I would rate my food, I would immediately veer towards grilling, because that's
Can I answer this question?
that's what I love to do. Yes, but I'll say one more thing to that. In terms of how you rate your food and what you're trying to pursue. When you're doing that, you want to be honest. And for me, my novels are adaptations. They are not, the novel's not sacred. Like, I wrote so many versions of each of those stories. I've done so many scenes that didn't make the novels. I've refined it and worked it and tried to get to a final product that's as good as I can make it. But it comes down to it. At the end of the day, I'm looking at a printed version that's one adaptation of a story I created. And I've seen 7, I've seen 5, like a lot of them. And then readers only read the one, and it is like set in stone, and they don't want me to ruin it in a graphic novel or in a show or in a movie, because they have this one version that they love. And I'm grateful for that. But for me, it's one of many versions. And so adapting it's not scary. But go ahead, Brian.
Well, okay. I think this is the best way to think about Nate's novels too. You've all read a book that you didn't have to chew at all while you consumed it. And I think Nate's books are the kind that you do need to chew to digest a little. So, I mean, if you've got chicken tendies on one side where you can just move through that thing because it's pre-ground chicken meat.
Doesn't even need to be chicken.
It doesn't even have to be chicken. Yeah, that's true.
Chicken don't have fingers, but I'm eating them for some reason.
Chicken fingers. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the way I like to describe it. Nate's books are something you need to chew and work on a bit, not because they're tough, but because they're more worth it than pre-processed chicken tendies.
That is part of the goal too, because you want stories to pay off at multiple levels. So if a third grader who's ahead in their reading level reads a novel rapidly and is all excited because there were doors in the wall, and that's it, there was tension, and they felt the tension, they felt the excitement, or they love explorer societies and secret societies, so they're all about Ashtown. That's great. Like, I don't mind them liking it on that level. But when critics will email me after having published reviews, angry that they'd missed something or suddenly realizing that there was this other thing going on, that's also very gratifying that there's another layer. So I'm not trying to just serve cookies. I do want it to be a little more than that, but I talk about it like cookies. It's cookies all the time. But if I had to nail down the best food metaphor of what I'm trying to accomplish, it's meat for sure.
How many of you all have read Percy Jackson? Any of the Lightning Thief stuff? Yeah, okay, a good number. So imagine, Nate also does a lot with myth combined with modern day life, right? Percy Jackson, I think, is Chicken Tendies level. You're going to come across a Hydra with a Dunkin' Donuts t-shirt on, and there's going to be no explanation, and it actually makes me really mad. But Nate's are not that level. So you can kind of start gauging
the Dunkin' Donuts t-shirt.
The Dunkin' Donuts would make sense, darn it. So yeah, that's a comparison I think helps situate the food.
Next question. Or do we go to Brian?
No, I think
back
maybe
there.
we do. They's got a lot of questions. Maybe we do all the questions, and you all don't get Jeroboam.
Mr. Cole, I was just going to ask, as an acquisitions editor, what advice would you give to someone trying to get their...
Okay, I'm going to ask that question for you into the microphone. Mr. Cole, as acquisitions editor, what advice do you give to somebody who's trying to get into the publishing industry?
Oh man, I think you need to work on getting your novel the best possible it can be, judged by someone who's not related to you or your friend. And that's kind of my big piece of advice, because I get far too many that are just not up to the standard, and they never seem like they can be because they're not self-reflective. That's my answer. Pursue.
So the advice is get good.
Yep.
As good as you can, and then get a little better than that.
Right. And there's practical
publishers
advice.
Publishers want books, they want novels, but they want
Right.
novels that are going to sell. It's a business, and they want the best stuff they can find, and so you're in a competition that way. So improve yourself, and then publishers will be thrilled to discover you.
You'll
Everybody
love
will.
the kind of manuscripts that I get submitted. Sometimes make you realize what you're competing against, but other times they're quite good. But the ones I remember is getting a submission from an actual clown. It was called "Clowns Have Funny Tastes" was the name of his manuscript that he submitted to me.
They do.
It's based off that joke about the cannibals eating the clown, and one looks at the other and says, "This tastes funny." Right? Get it? Yeah, the groan. Anyways, that right there, and in his manuscript, he had spelled funny with one N, so it was "Clowns Have Funny Tastes" is actually the name of his manuscript. So don't do that on a fiction level. Funny. That's all I got.
In the back.
Are there real worlds as depicted, a multiverse of sorts as depicted in 100 Cupboards? Sorry, no, connected worlds, not a multiverse. Is that realistic?
Are there connected worlds?
As you have written in the 100 Cupboards.
Exactly like that. I mean, I don't know why not, but it's more that there's a connectivity. I don't think it's like 100 Cupboards, but I think there's a lot more to reality than we understand. A lot more to reality than we can begin to understand. And so the concept of the second sight and things like that, I absolutely believe in. I think that's the way the world is.
So meaning people who can see fairies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
that
think
there
that's
are
biblical,
fairies.
and you can exegete that, and you can make the case from Scripture that that's in fact the way the world functions. And given those assumptions, there's a few things you can build off of that, that mean the world is very, very strange. So if you think about Elisha praying that God would open the eyes of his servant and enable him to see what's really happening. You have somebody who's standing in a scene and thinks it's two dudes looking out at a bunch of the king's soldiers. And then Elisha can see but he can see what's really there. Like he can see the real version of this moment. And we learned from this a couple things from this incident when his servant's eyes are opened and he sees a devil army functionally, and then he sees an angelic army as well. A couple of things we learn here. One of the keys is there are angel horses. So
because he sees chariots,
in this reality, there's spiritual warriors on spiritual horses that are actually there. And Elisha the prophet asks that his servant be given the sight, that he be able to see what's actually happening. That's weird. That's a very strange thing. And it kind of opens up lots of metaphysical questions that are difficult to answer. And we just have to be comfortable not knowing where the edge is. And then you have to say, like, okay, so if you keep the sight, and then there's, angels, spirit warriors on spirit horses on your mountainside above your cave, protecting you, and you are able to continue seeing them as they leave. Where do they exit? How far can you follow them? Into which portals do they go? Or do they literally have to accelerate up and go as fast as possible through space? Are we talking about Star Trek? Or are we talking about doorways, portals, and things like that? Or are they always here and they live here? They have places they go. They have their holy ground. They have the places that they actually like get off the horse and let the horses pasture. Like there's so many questions, and we get just this little glimpse through of what it would be like to have that sight, which Elisha had, and which his servant didn't and was given briefly. And then it just poses tons of fantastical questions. So no, I don't think there's wardrobes to Narnia, but my worldview accounts for many, many weird things that I couldn't even begin to imagine that belong in that section of the bookstore. And so the way the world really is belongs in a book over by 100 cupboards and other fantasy novels, like where it belongs over there. And that's the actual world. And so one of the reasons why realism is ridiculous as a genre is because it's unrealistic. It's not the actual world. Fantasy is frequently mind-numbingly stupid and unoriginal. Like it's really trite and dumb. It can be, or it can be towering and majestic like Lord of the Rings is. It can really pay off. But that kind of storytelling is the kind of storytelling we see in reality around us. I've had weird things happen to me. I've had very strange things happen to me. I've had things happen to me that I can't explain in a material universe. Like, I just can't. But you can't explain elephants in a material universe and how they behave. And there's a ton of other animals like that. How does an elephant
graveyards.
know? This is something I've on the next Riot in the Dance installment. When you start researching elephants, you discover that they are highly nervous, meaning like their nervous systems are intense. So they look really tough and rugged, but they can feel a fly landing on their body anywhere, which is more than you can say. And that would be kind of terrible, incidentally, being in Africa, being that size and having that little tail and that nose, trying to cover your whole body to brush the flies off. But they can feel that, but then we know just it's happened. They're aware of when a friend dies over a great distance. So from miles and miles away, if a friend dies, they're aware of it and they can go to that location. It's like, it's bizarre.
That's well attested.
It's like, then it happens. It happens and happens. And it's sort of like, that's not a materialistic world. It doesn't work. There's something going on there that is a kind of spiritual sensitivity that we don't understand. But we can't explain dragonflies or butterflies or literally anything. We just have them around, and so we're used to them. So anyway, that's a really long-winded way of answering the question about, do I think the world is like 100 cupboards? I think 100 cupboards is a cheap knockoff version of the real world. It's not me trying to make the real world more interesting. It's me trying to wake people up to the interestingness of the world, if that makes sense. Front row.
What would you say is the greatest fairy tale? Why?
What
What's
would
the
you
greatest
say
fairy
is the
tale and why,
greatest fairy
Brian?
tale and why? I'm asking you first.
I just talked. It's your turn.
Do you mean fictional fairy tale? Because I mean, obviously the answer and the safe answer and the real answer is really the story of the Bible. It has all
Jesus,
the
God,
ingredients.
Bible.
And that's the one.
So let's go with fictional then.
Yeah. Fictional greatest fairy tale. I think Chronicles of Narnia. There you go. I'm not. What are you looking for in that answer? Because the idea of the fairy
The
tales.
Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
The new one, not the original.
It's got so much more meaning in it. Yeah, I don't have a particular answer. I think there's a lot of great fairy tales. Fairy tales tend to encode different parts about society that you help you teach. They're kind of the original stories are soul food. They're the things that you tell your children to make sure your children don't go with the strange woman in the forest.
Or don't cross the bridge.
Yeah. Or don't cross the bridge until their big brother gets there. That's when you go across the bridge.
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton and I think comparing them is difficult, but the later ones have more ability to be sophisticated and superior because the earlier ones came first. So you get to build on them.
Right.
So I think that Lewis's are fantastic. And I think that they would not be fantastic without all the Germanic fairy tales and Norse fairy tales that came first. And
those are really, really weird. You know,
Yeah.
hedgehog people, you know, a guy who has a bear skin for no reason and his skin turns into a bear, you know, tons of blood and gore, random happenings, stuff turning into other things. There's no rhyme or reason to those early fairy tales.
they hadn't developed rules yet or discovered the architecture of narrative. And so while narrative architecture exists in the world, it's like the laws of physics, which took a while to kind of codify and work with. You know, like, but people understood if you leaned sticks together, they wouldn't fall over. But before we started engineering truss systems and pitches and snow loads.
You got the Leaning Tower of Pisa before that.
Yeah. Prior to that, we were telling stories and not all of them did great, but they sure cut off a lot of toes.
Yep.
They were pretty bloody and
I mean, the Arabian
messy.
Nights are fascinating. Sinbad's fascinating. It comes cultural food from a different culture. You can see how absolutely violent and pretty terrible the Arabic world is.
Yeah.
They're fun lenses into whatever culture they're told in.
Yeah, there's a lot of I've stolen a fair amount from those mines over there, but they're cool stuff. But you also can't really read the originals, and there's a lot of gung ho kids like you who have at different points thought I love old stories, and so I'm going to go read the original fairy tales, and I'm going to read the 1001 Arabian Nights, and then you realize, is this porn? You know, it's like it's
bad stuff.
Sometimes, yeah, you know, like it was not good. Some of them are amazing. Some of them withstood the test of time. Some of them were.
I mean, even Ovid, right? Which
Yeah.
gets put on this pedestal as classical Christian education. We're all
you
reading
need to
Ovid,
read it. You
and then
need
we
to
think, whoa, what
why
did I just
am I
read?
reading this? That's a good question. So there was one moment when my very kind-hearted cousin, the oldest, older than my children, she was my cousin. She was watching my kids and their cousins one night, and we came back, and she had decided on a whim, she'd bought this old book at an antique store to read them the original Grimm's fairy tales as a bedtime story as they're all going to bed. And she just kind of plowed on through them under the absolute assumption that they're old and so they're good and this is healthy. And we had a lot of nightmares that night. It was grim indeed.
Yeah.
And of course, they'd also just watched Wallace and Gromit's Curse of the Were-Rabbit, so they were keyed up for lots of
Both
weird
emotionally and
hybrid
mentally.
claymation versions, and the night terrors ensued.
That's great.
So let's get a question from over here if anybody has one from the toothpaste colored crowd. Yes, sir.
Do you have a date for the fourth Ashtown?
Oh, we
burial?
knew we couldn't get through
Oh,
without
do I
this
have a
question.
date for the fourth Ashdown burial book? Well, I already finished it, and I've just been selfishly sitting on it and refusing to release it. So
This is not true, lest I get 500 million emails about it. Where is it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. The world is weird. And so trying to fit it in has been difficult, as a lot of other things have crowded it out. But it's right there. I'd say it's on one of the front burners, as long as there's at least 4 front burners right now.
Nate's house actually has 8 front burners, I think.
Nope. If you count the barbecue. Yeah.
Are you gonna keep sending out the subscriptions?
Yes, the plan is. Yes.
This
And
is hard
so-
to believe, but I actually have other things I would rather have Nate write first before
Yeah,
Ashtown.
there are some things I have to do, but I can get them going at once. The question is, of course, Ashtown Barrels 4. Yes, I hope to continue the subscriptions as I finish. So as the rough draft is completed, I will be sending those out. Then it will be accumulated into one manuscript. It's almost or just short of 80,000 words right now. That's as far as I've gotten. It'll probably be around 105. And then I'll edit and revise and try to talk my original editor into doing a pass for nostalgia's sake. And then we'll hopefully be publishing a finished version. So the subscription missives that have gone out will continue to when they actually have one finished, but it will still be in the rough draft format. So chapter 16 is up next, and it's open on my desktop.
Good question.
Yes, you have bad taste.
How do they get good
So
taste?
the question is, back to the earlier episode, we have accused them of having bad taste. How do they get good taste? Brian, do you want to start?
You need to start.
He's sitting here in a Hemingway t-shirt, Old
wore
Man of the Sea, which is
I
a
wore
bit
my
defiant
I wore my most pretentious shirt.
of taste. He wore his most hipstery of all
How-
t-shirts and told me to wear a
Yeah.
hoodie, which is a completely classy thing to wear.
Yeah. Well, there's only so many famous authors who've killed themselves in your own state. So
Yeah.
that is why I wore my Hemingway t-shirt. As a native Idahoan, represent.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question, how do you get good taste? Education, you got to learn the grammar first. So you need to learn what taste is. We have many episodes about how to evaluate art and find out what is good, how something can be both good for you, well done, and true to the world that God made, and kind of evaluating that triangle of truth, goodness, and beauty is where you start getting good taste. I think you also have to be a bit merciless with yourself and just decide that you want to have good taste. So if generations have said this book is awesome, track down and find out why they thought it was awesome and if they were right, because sometimes they're wrong.
Sometimes they're wrong. And I would say start with a calibration, with a check that's pretty easy for you to falsify. Yeah. So you want to start by going to those questions that have an answer key in the back of the textbook as you're trying to figure out, is this good? Is this bad? Is my taste wrong? And so one of the characters I go to and have gone to on this podcast before is David. And if you read the story of David, the question is, do you genuinely like him? Like, do you like King David? Do you find your sympathies and affection to be aligned with him? Because you can flip to the back, the answer key, and God does. And God says, yep, that's a man after my own heart. And if you say, I can't stand that guy, then you have a problem. Your taste is off. So how do you go reread the stories and try to find, what is it about David that God loves? Why does Saul, the best father in Kings, in Samuel, like I'm trying to think, I might be slandering some people in Kings, but I'm trying to think of a better father than Saul. And it's tough. But Saul has the kingdom stripped away from him and the messianic line, and David comes swooping in, and God loves him. Now, David, maybe you're like, okay, he is a little bit, he is a little bit manly and poetic. And so the girls are like, yeah, I'd probably love him a little bit. He'd be the worst guy to be in class with, but I would probably obsess over him. And let me just go ahead and say to all you girls, that would be the case. If you were around that guy.
Playing the harp.
Yeah. Okay. I've talked about this before, but it bears saying again. This guy, pre-internet. Okay, so we're talking, I don't know if you knew this, but the Bronze Age didn't have TikTok. There weren't reels. And yet, his musical ability was so good that often Gibeah in the king's court, where they hate Bethlehem and Judah, by the way. Gibeah, read the end of Judges, and you realize that there's an old grudge between Bethlehem and Gibeah. Often Gibeah in the king's court, they've heard about David. They've heard about how good he is as a musician. Like, he's already hit fame musically, enough so that he's getting called to the king's court, which is as high as you can go. He won American Idol. He's there in the king's court, and he's still going to go kill a giant. He's still going to become a famous warrior. He's still going to replace Jonathan, who is, if you pay any attention, quite a dude. Like a legit dude. And David has enough mojo that Jonathan says, the throne's yours. I'm not going to fight you for this.
I mean,
Jonathan's the heir to the throne. Now go read any ancient story about tribal feuds, which they have, Benjamin and Judah. And then you have this powerful king, the first king, the king that's united all of Israel into a kingdom. So this is kind of like King Alfred in England, the one to unite the whole thing into one kingdom. And his son, who is not the weakling, his son is actually more noble than Saul is dangerous on the battlefield, is wise and righteous. His son sees David and is blown away by him and defers to him. And they don't go into this Bronze Age blood feud. Now, Saul's line does, but not Jonathan. This guy's a piece of work. So David's already made it as a rock star. Then he makes it as a warrior. He's the kind of guy whose older brothers could be Navy SEAL level mighty men in the royal guard. Eliab is seen by Samuel, and Samuel immediately thinks that's the king. So David's brothers are also studs and much bigger than he is. And yet David ends up ruling over them as well. So what is it about this guy? Like, God blesses him with this and all these abilities through his story. If you read the stories of David and you don't like him, your taste is off. Now let's go do something more difficult than that. How about Jacob? How many people like Jacob? Everybody's like, I know I'm supposed to.
The evangelical thing about Jacob is,
oh yeah.
Well, he kind of did some bad stuff.
How many times have you heard people rag on Jacob?
He shouldn't have told those lies the kids say as they look up from Genesis.
He's lying. He's smooth-skinned. He's greasy.
Like the hairy ones.
Not like that lovable Sasquatch.
Yeah. The red Sasquatch himself.
Imagine having to put goat skin on your arms
to feel like
your
brother.
To be like, that's a man who needed no blankets right there.
Yeah.
He was built for his time, a man of his age.
A man who smelled like just the outdoors so strongly that his 80-year-old dad is like, that's Esau.
That's my barnyard right there. That's my barnyard. So Jacob, he's gotten a bad rap. People misread the stories. And so if you read the story of Jacob and you think, I don't like him, you're reading it wrong. Because God liked him. What is God like? What is this? What's going on?
God made a deal with him.
Yeah.
God he deals with those that he loves throughout the Bible.
Do you find Joseph kind of obnoxious? You should. He is kind of obnoxious. But it doesn't justify his brothers doing what they did.
You should be able to laugh when he comes to all his brothers as the youngest brother and says, "Hey guys, guess what dream I had?"
Now let's also say he's an interpreter of dreams.
Yeah.
So the thing that like bails him out later is he can interpret dreams. And
He
he
actually
plays
gets
dumb and
dreams.
goes to his brothers and's like, I had this weird dream. What do you think it means, guys?
So you all are bowing down to my.
There's this like, there's me, and then there's, I guess you're bowing.
And also mom and dad.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, so is Joseph
look at
being
my cloak.
provoking? Is he provoking? Yeah, he is provoking. And he more than learned his lesson. But he's also playing games later when his brothers come back, and he's absolutely looking for a payoff, a narrative payoff, and yet God delivers everybody through him. So basically check your taste against the Bible stories.
There's also that detail that he cried so loud that everyone could hear him, which is interesting to kind of
It's a
balance
weird
with it all. He just is sobbing, and the entire household's like, what's happening?
Yep. So also here's another pop quiz. The Book of Esther. Good story or bad story?
It's a great story.
Great story. Check your taste. Calibrate your taste. Great story. Esther, good character, bad character? Does she actually seduce a married man? Yep, she does. And good on her. Like she read her moment in the story. The lives of her people
Nate, you're not supposed to say that to the mom.
were at stake. And she did what needed to be done. She actually did the right thing as the heroine of the story, which is really uncomfortable for us. And so we paper over it. We pretend like it wasn't sexual. We pretend like he wasn't married. And of course, polygamy back then. Watch The King and I think it gives you a great perspective on the Book of Esther. Like, why is this chick falling for a married dude? Because in a polygamous culture, dudes are always available. They're never off limits, which is immature and weird. But in this situation, it's actually like she's really pushing the limits. It's quite difficult to get your head around those situational ethics. The situational ethics of the Book of Esther. Now, luckily, you will not be in that situation. That world doesn't exist anymore. But don't paper over things that are really in the stories. Like, know the stories, understand the stories for real, and still find your affections aligned with God's in that narrative.
Is that the time that we end where we've got, I think
we
4
do another
minutes
one.
left? One more?
Let's see. Let's see.
We'll see what we
We
can
got
get.
bad ones. Go orange. First orange person.
New YA book ideas.
Do I have new ideas for series? Yeah, I have quite a few actually. And there's notebooks, clipboards, all sorts of things. When they're going to happen, I don't know. But yeah, I do have a number of them that make me happy. And it's good to have kind of a war of attrition in your own head. Which ones survive over time are probably the best to do. The best ones to write.
Some of the movies might even come out first. Or not.
Yeah, there's plenty there, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I've got some new stuff. I got to finish Ashtown first. Yeah, in the middle. The exact factors that make me dislike what?
The Lord of the Rings movies.
Oh. How about you, Brian? Because you have a different perspective than I do.
Okay, so Aragorn being basically a total misunderstanding of all motivation of every character in it, except maybe Gandalf. So that's my
Who's
main
always
problem.
in a mood.
Right. Yeah. So as far as that works, I mean, if you take Aragorn and turn him into a conflicted, whiny guy who just has to take up his destiny but is afraid to, you've missed the point of the Lord of the Rings. If you turn Frodo from the heroic older guy that he is into the gaspy, effeminate thing that Elijah Wood is, you've also missed the point. I guess Sam might be all right. Sam's a pretty good character, and so is Gollum. All right, I'm being there's a few okay ones. Also, if you take Faramir, one of the best characters in the books, and turn him into someone that is universally hated by everyone, or Eowyn and turn her from a noble princess into an infatuated high schooler. I don't know. What do you need me to go on? And that's
I hate way more than all of that.
Yeah.
So Brian got us out to a good start, but it's like, what do you actually particularly hate about gluten-free cookies? And it's like, well, the sand in my mouth, the lack of gluten,
the lie that they are.
all the goodness that was there that you've removed somehow and have handed me this lie.
Ooh, I got a good question. The back question is, did you know that Tolkien said that he was actually nauseated by Walt Disney's work? Okay. So he said, a couple things are okay, but I'm nauseated by
physically ill.
Like, I would like to vomit when I watch his work. I think until
he probably did. Knowing Tolkien, he probably puked in his mouth a little.
Yeah. Until you can answer that question to the satisfaction of like something that would actually make you ill. What is it about Walt Disney that makes Tolkien vomit? Until we can answer that, I don't think we can take Peter Jackson's work. Yeah, it's not the
wokeness. It has
woke.
nothing to do with the wokeness. It's back when Disney was good. All those movies you were raised on.
Yep. The ones with all the racist parts. Yeah.
And I would say that one of the most interesting things you can look at when you're talking about inklings in movies is in the letters of C.S. Lewis. He talks about disliking a film version of King Solomon's Mines. And he goes on for a little bit about the exchange of fear and duress, stress. How people don't understand that dying in different ways is scary in different ways. There's different breeds of fear and flavors of fear and stress and stakes and all these things. And how a film adaptation will swap in drowning for dying alone in the dark in a cave or whatever. And they can kind of burning alive for being betrayed by your wife. And it's actually very different. Every single scene is different if you get the stakes wrong, if you get the character motivations wrong, if you don't understand the stress of it, if you make Faramir instead of a picture of nobility, if you make him
he's like a Jonathan
version
character.
of Boromir,
Yeah.
and he's just a knockoff Boromir with a worse nose, and that's it. If you make the Oliphants as tall as Minas Tirith's walls, then there's no conflict, there's no stress. If they show up and just kerblam, they're knocking gates in and smashing walls, and you lose that moment where the Lord of the Nazgul and Gandalf face off in a gate that has never been breached in its history, and the way Tolkien lays down lore, where there's been thousands of years of no enemy has ever breached these gates, and then this one has for the first time ever, and yet there's this dead wizard who's back here to stop them, and they have this two different versions of undead wizards sitting there. One resurrected as Gandalf the White, the other has been riding this beast and a ring wraith for millennia, and they're here squaring off in that gate. When you're sitting there and then you hear the horns of the Rohirrim coming, like it pays off. It's so symphonic. There's so much orchestra to it. So it's such an intense tapestry that it's kind of like viewing the unicorn tapestries at trying to remember what it's called in New York, whatever, the Cloisters. They have these medieval unicorn tapestries that are gorgeous, and they're like two-sided, and things are amazing. I think they're two-sided. I'll have to fact check that later. These unicorn tapestries, and then somebody says, "Hey, I've done a tapestry," and they get out one of those little pot holder kits that little girls do, and they do one and hold it up for you and say, "Look, I copied it." And I say, "I hate it so much in my bones with everything I have. I hate that." And people are offended. Why? But why? And it's like, because it's an insult to the source material. So the films offend me. They hurt my feelings.
It burns us.
And
precious.
Yeah. I mean, really? We have an elf surfing on a shield? Like, come on.
So C.S. Lewis described Tolkien as beauties that pierce like swords and burn like cold iron. And Peter Jackson has swapped that out for our, slight moment of discomfort as we watch Saruman dangle Gandalf over the edge of Orthanc. Like, oh no, he might fall.
On a green screen.
Right? It's that sort of switch where you're like, hey, where'd the beauty go? Where did the piercing go? It went for a cheap cinematographic whatever.
Set piece. For
Set
a little
piece.
thing called a set piece.
Yeah.
Let's swap in a set piece.
Oh, I
Great.
do admit I like the soundtrack.
Never paid any mind. I couldn't get past it. And even Aragorn's voice. I can't do it.
Aragorn's voice is incredible.
Okay,
And we will die with
we
them.
could go a long time on this, by the way. So we won't.
We should be done.
We should be done talking about Lord of the Rings, the movies, and hope that all of you hate them as much as we do.
Don't even bring up Rings of Power.
Or do. Rings of Power is a cautionary tale for streamers everywhere. Do we have time for, we got 3 in the back. We'll do one more and close with this in the middle. Right there.
I think we did a
Is
whole
there
episode on
one? Okay, let's do a different question.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, find it. We did a whole episode on it.
Yes, back over there. You looking around.
Wait, all right. Oh, what do you say to a friend who has been working on a novel for like 8+ years and it's going nowhere? Tell her to stop.
What do you
I
say
think
to
you
a
answered your own
friend?
question. What do you tell a friend who's been working on a novel for 8 years and is going nowhere? And you tell her to stop? I mean, isn't that what you tell her?
You say, put down the laptop.
I love
Walk
you.
away
Stop it.
slowly.
Have you read it?
No, she won't give it to anyone.
Okay, yeah. Tell her to stop being her. And then once she's done being her, to stop writing that story and move on.
We have a whole episode about the artistic temperament as well. It sounds like your friend has the ultimate case.
Yep. And could be a great friend, but somebody needs to read it and be honest about it.
Maybe there's good parts and she needs to just put it down and try a different story.
But if 8 years without letting anybody read it, I think is a different problem.
Yeah, you're right.
I think she probably has just been playing Minecraft.
Or
There's not a novel. There's no novel.
Or Minesweeper. She's really good at Minesweeper.
Minesweeper. Perfect. Should we give one more? Yeah.
In the back?
I keep saying one more, but
What are your favorite and least favorite things about Harry Potter?
this is turning into a hit and run episode.
I know, yeah. They're like, here's a beehive.
Yeah. Here's a brick thrown in another
My
beehive.
son did that while camping. All his little cousins were around and he smacked the table full of bees and a lot of bee stings, a lot of swollen faces. Church camping trip became.
Is that what we're about to do?
I think so.
We're talking about the movies or the books? Harry Potter. The books? We've talked about Harry Potter a fair amount on this.
Yeah, listen to our previous episode.
Yeah, but
It's a
there's
bad magic
plenty
system.
of great stuff about him, and then it jumps the rails. But the books are worth reading, and I'm grateful to him
Yeah.
for reintroducing middle grade fantasy to a broad market. I think they left the world better than she found it. I think the books have done good in the world, and I think more good than bad. So I'll just say that. But there's plenty of things to complain about, and we do in other episodes. But they're worth respecting and being grateful toward, especially as a novelist like I am. I can't complain when somebody like Rowling just balloons the marketplace in which I work. That's fantastic.
Okay, lend the immortal words of Frog and Toad. One very last cookie.
Make it good. In the middle, in the orange. You.
That you your books are inspired by classes. What specific classes inspired your books? And what classes inspired more than one novel?
What classics have inspired Nate's works? We've done an
All of
episode
them.
on every single one.
All
of
the
them.
classics have inspired all my books. Picasso. I don't often quote Picasso. But he said something about how great artists steal. You know, people imitate, great artists just steal straight up. I don't read him closely, so I'm probably misquoting him. Basically, every single work of human art is collage work. We all have scissors and glue. We're stealing stuff constantly. We can't create one new thing. Lewis talked about being unable to create anything de novo, like from nothing, this, wholly new. And it's just all theft. And so I've not stolen the bones of a classic entirely, except for the Odyssey, and pulling the Odyssey and kind of a Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer vibe together in Lee Pike Ridge. That's probably the most intact theft that I've done. And normally I steal much smaller bits, characters, themes, things like that. And so the theme of father hunger and homecoming and everything that's in Lee Pike Ridge, I use that elsewhere, but not anywhere near as large a chunk as I did in Lee Pike Ridge. So Lee Pike Ridge is probably the most structured off of directly structured off a classic. And there we go. This has been SASF number 100 and something. With a live studio audience. I think you guys get like a B-. Don't you think? Yeah. Yeah. There we go.
You know that now is the time when I like to thank you for being a SASF listener and also show you something cool that we've been working at Canon Press. And what I'm holding right now, if you're only listening in audio, you won't be able to see this. You'll have to listen to the sound. But if you're watching on Canon Plus and if you're a subscriber, you can see I'm holding a Christ is Lord box. Go to ChristIsLord.com to see why we're trying to put up a billboard that says Christ is Lord in your area and why that's making certain sad sections of the internet very upset. Of course, it's true, and so we got some fun stuff inside. Again, if you're just listening, hear the wonderful sounds. We got stickers. We got bumper stickers. We have, they say Christ is Lord too. We've got a wartime songbook. But of course, the most important part of this box is the Mere Christendom book, which I have to say is one of the most pretty books you're going to see. Check out that foil on the cover, the elegant cross on it, and of course, a signature from Douglas Wilson. What is Mere Christendom? Well, basically, it's the declaration of the book that Christ conquered the West the first time, and this is how he's going to do it again. So, ChristIsLord.com, buy the book, check out the billboards, and enjoy.